I just hope everyone enjoys it. I mean, no one needs a pep talk from me, but there's gonna there's
Go on,
there's, look, we're going to lose 3 in a row, 4 in a row, here or there, multiple
That's
times.
not the pep talk I didn't mind, not that one.
No,
the other one. We're going to finish 5th. No,
and we're going for a 3rd straight promotion to the Champions League.
Welcome back, a familiar face to the podcast, Guardian European sports correspondent. Is it Nick Ames? You've had a promotion when we last spoke. Is it? Have I got that right? European sports.
Yeah, do you know what? I don't know if it's European sports correspondent or European sport correspondent, but it's one of the two.
Well, it's surely plural, because tell our listeners and viewers where you've been for the last few weeks.
I've been, first I was at the Euros in Germany for 5 weeks. It was in the end after a messed up plane journey home, and then it was a few days at home, and then to France for the Olympics, which I got back from on Monday. And that was many sports. There was a lot of Googling taekwondo and fencing and handball, which I always seem to end up coming back to in this job. So it's been a journey through a lot of different sports. It's also been great fun, actually. The Olympics was much more fun than I expected. I've got to say.
Yeah, handball's great. I love handball, and water polo is another one where you don't really have a sense of what it's about when you get in there. It's quite violent, isn't it? It's like the hockey of the swimming pool. I don't know, but
do you know what? I went. The final thing I went to on when was it? Sunday was the water polo final between Serbia and Croatia, which is enough need, or obviously, and yeah, the amount of stuff that goes on beneath the water as well, like grappling and kicking and everything. Like not only do you have to be a great athlete, but a bit of an elite wrangler and fighter beneath the water, you know. So I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I found it very entertaining. So yeah.
Is there VAR in water polo? I suspect probably not. Underwater camera.
No, the one that really surprised me, well, I don't know about surprise, but amused me, was VAR in fencing and VAR in taekwondo as well.
Yeah, I remember that took quite a while, the taekwondo, didn't it? I think, if I remember.
Yeah.
So
because you've got to work out whether, you know, who's touched each other first or something like that, and it happens so quickly. And in fencing, especially, the VAR official would come back, and it'd be like in football, really overwrought and staged, but in fencing you can get away with it a bit more, I think. And then they give their decision like that, you know, and the crowd would go wild, and there was a big wait. But anti-VAR, obviously, in principle.
Of course. Well, I haven't yet created the Blue Monday VAR swear jar, but with the new season coming up and Ipswich taking their rightful place, I think we can say, in the Premier League, we'll have to consider certain arrangements at some point. Ed did ask in our Telegram group, are you missing the javelin? But I'm expecting you to be super excited about the new season. And can I ask you about a trip up to Suffolk earlier in the week, Nick?
Yeah, you may. I got back from the Olympics on Monday. On Tuesday, I went up to Playford Road to interview Sam Morsy, the captain of Ipswich Town Football Club, for an interview that should have recently, I think, gone online. It should, I think, be in Saturday's paper as well. So grab it if you're interested. Have a click if you're interested. Spoke really, really well, I think. More openly, perhaps, in some ways, about his past and what brought him here. He was really, really good on, especially. Quite kind of didn't want to dwell too much on the sort of achievement of going up, all the celebrations, and claim that he hadn't lost himself in any of it, and it was just like bang bang, get to the Premier League, which I kind of believed, actually. But no, it's a really nice half hour with him. Really interesting, erudite, genuine bloke to speak to. Looks in fantastic shape, by the way. You can tell he's really up for this. Like, he's like, I don't think he ever didn't look in good shape, but I was thinking, wow, you have absolutely dealt with yourself brilliantly over the summer. I've got no worries about him, judging by how he was looking. So fantastic to be able to speak to him. Really appreciated the opportunity, as we always do. He was certainly well up for Liverpool, and of course bit of a showdown with his mate Salah as well, who he said he said they'd had a bit of communication earlier in the summer, and I think they chatted about it a bit. So that'll be an interesting little subplot to see who gets the first little nibble in there. Hopefully it's Sammy, obviously.
It's Morsy. It'll be Morsy, won't it? But yeah, exactly. We'll be looking for that from minute one. Lining up alongside Sam Morsy. Could, should, would. We've recorded this in advance, folks. So I've kind of broken the fourth wall a little bit there. Kalvin Phillips signing. I know it's only a loan, but what a statement that is.
What a signing. I mean, we knew that Town meant business in the transfer window this summer, but you don't always know in reality what you're going to be able to get over the line. I think they have tried for 2 or 3, big-ish names, but they're not easy to do. The market is crazy. Clubs want a lot of money, exorbitant amounts. Players' expectations are huge, and frankly, I mean, I had no information about the inner workings of this deal. When I heard that Town were interested alongside Everton and Fulham, I thought, okay, that's good, but maybe not the sort of deal you want to spend the whole summer on if it's not going to go your way. So to hear that it appears to have done, it's fascinating. I mean, I guess City and West Ham fans would have one opinion about Kalvin Phillips, but I also think he's a great age for a footballer. He clearly, if he wants to come to Town rather than somewhere like Everton, which would be an easy gig basically in terms of, showing up at an established Premier League club, he clearly wants to play his football and prove himself again. Play for a club that I think plays a type of high tempo football that suits him. He clearly wants it, and I would trust Kieran McKenna more than most to be able to turn him into the player that we all know he can be. I mean, look, we all watched Euro 2020 3 years ago, didn't we? He was fantastic. He really drove England on in a lot of those games. He was brilliant at Leeds. I think the main problem at City, really, it's not been an attitude thing or something like that. I think maybe such a complex way that Guardiola wants to play. I think technically he's probably not quite up to all of those bits in midfield, and there's no shame in that. Town aren't Man City. We're never going to be at quite that highly wound a level. But I think for what Town need in terms of a really high energy person who can distribute, can get up and down, can lead, can win the ball back, has a mountain of Premier League experience and isn't over the hill yet, I think it's an incredible deal to get done. And as we say, there are caveats. He's not been in great form for a couple of years. Need to get him used to playing 10 straight games back to back to back, get him in that groove, find out what the best balance is in there, which is going to be interesting now, I think, assuming as well that we sign Phillips and one other. But look, it's exciting. It shows what Town are capable of these days. It's also the kind of signing that I think in moderation Town need to be making.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of deals kind of stewing around. Stewing, is that the right word? I don't know. The transfer window is kind of just over a fortnight away.
Percolating.
That's a great word. Journalist, podcaster. So, what's your kind of feeling on business still to be done? I mean, happy with the business done so far, presumably?
Happy with what's been done. Think there needs to be more. I mean, this is hardly a new opinion, but I think along with Phillips, another good midfield option is needed. I mean, look, we need 2 top players for every position, don't we? So I think they will look at that left-sided role in attack. It was a shame not to get Jadon Philogene. There's definitely someone needed there. The Broadhead injury, I think, is a blow. It leaves them looking really light for a few weeks there now. I suspect up front they'd have looked for someone else anyway, because I don't think you can get through a season with just 2 centre forwards, even if you only start with 1, because if someone gets injured, which has unfortunately just happened, then you're living hand to mouth. So I think the plan would have been to get someone else in anyway. Whether that will be Armando Breyer or not, I have no idea. But I think somebody of that profile, I think Breyer is a good profile for Town, actually. He's not quite done it yet at 22, but he's over 6 foot, isn't he? I was quite impressed actually at the Euros with how he ran the channels quite well for Albania. That's the kind of striker that we quite like, isn't it? Someone who'll work the line, run those channels, be quite unselfish, hold the ball up, not necessarily bang in 20 goals, but bring the best out of other people and make spaces. I think that for a kid of his age, he's actually quite good at that. So I can see why he's the profile of player that we might target, and I expect someone like that to come in. Smodic, obviously, where he would fit into all this as an alternative, coming in a bit more narrowly off a left, or as an alternate number 10, I'm not entirely sure. But and then I guess the only remaining question is another centre back. It's that right hand side seems to be causing one or two little aggravations. I think until Harry Clark is back, you're going to be looking, I think, at Twanzebe backing up Johnson, the way things are. So does there need to be a bit more of an out-and-out competitor to Luke Wolfenden? I'm sure that McKenna will think so. I'm not saying drop Wolfenden at all. I definitely wouldn't, but I think they'll be looking for somebody in there, whether it's Anna Hodzic, there we go, or whether it's someone else. So I think what we're getting from that long stream of consciousness is that there's still 4 or so needed, and that we're not quite where I don't think going into a first Premier League game we're quite where Town wanted to be.
Yeah, I agree with that. We shall see, and a lot of people, not me, excited by this time of year in terms of the transfer window. I would just like it over and deals over the line. But anyway, I can't wish the time away. Let me take you back to March, Nick, when you were last time on Blue Monday. We just beaten Sheffield Wednesday 6-0, and I rather unkindly pressured you into giving an end of season prediction. Do you recall what that was?
No, and I think you're probably going to embarrass me. So go on.
I'm going to only embarrass you as a segue into some questions from our Telegram subscribers. You predicted a playoff final appearance, didn't go beyond that, but proves what a difficult challenge it is to try and balance realism with optimism and trying to consider all the variables that predicting the future entails, which is really challenging. Quite a lot of Town fans have obviously paid attention to predictions in the media, the bookies, etc., maybe taking maybe a little bit of offense to that. It's not exactly an original take to predict that a newly promoted team is going to get relegated. But I guess questions from Joe and from Dan. Do you think journalists maybe take the easy option in picking the bottom 3? And Dan kind of says, is there a general consensus amongst the media about what our prospects really are this season? You're kind of balancing, I guess, one need to predict a 1-20 versus people's perception of the club. Are you able to talk to that?
It sort of goes both ways, really. I think people do take the easy option, and they'll always look first at who has been promoted. Do we think they've done something to make an absolute splash? If not, they're probably going down. So I think there is definitely that. I also think a lot of Town's players aren't that widely known to people who have only covered the Premier League, honestly. I mean, people need to do their research, obviously. I also think, I get, and I'm almost talking as a fan here, I get a bit frustrated when I hear people comparing Town to Luton, for example, because while there might be comparisons in how the season pans out, and I sort of almost expect that, it's a very different club, a very different size club, a very different structure and backing now. I don't think the comparison holds much water whatsoever. Is there a consensus over how people view Town? I don't know really. I think there's a consensus now on how people view McKenna.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably where people are. They think, okay, this club has come up, it's come back, and it's got a manager who might just be able to do something extraordinary. And if you look at it, you see those people predicting that Town do stay up are largely attributing it to him, I think. And we've seen so far he's a bit of a cheat. He's a little bit of a cheat code, isn't he? But yeah, I don't think there's one coherent view on how Town will do, and I don't have a coherent view on how Town will do either. Honestly, if I woke up in 9 months' time or something, and I heard that we finished bottom by 6 points, I wouldn't be surprised. But if I heard we finished 10th, I wouldn't raise a massive eyebrow. Genuinely, I think all bets are off this season, which is one reason why I would urge everyone just to show up and enjoy it from tomorrow onwards. Really.
Yeah, spot on. Totally agree. And I will not be asking you for a prediction for that exact reason. I had to do one for BBC and predicted 17th because it's close enough to the relegation zone to kind of acknowledge the task at hand, but also a confidence that there is something about McKenna and this team as well. You've met Sam Morsy and you know what he's about, and if he's setting the example, then who knows what's possible. And we've got history of finishing 5th as well, Nick. Not 2 decades ago.
We have, and to be fair, again, sort of against my Luton point, where there is the similarity is that a lot of people have forgotten about Ipswich, and we've all said this many times. I think most people understand that. It's why I think sometimes it's a bit harder to get targets over a line, especially at this stage. It's why Bournemouth is a sexier name than Ipswich Town at the moment. It's why Brentford is now. You and I can't believe that going back 10, 20, 30 years, but it is true. That is a fact. It is true. You see the name of Ipswich coming up now, if you're 25, 30 years old, and you might as well be seeing Luton coming up in terms of prestige. That is where the club was, that is where it has been, and even though the context is different, I don't for 1 minute expect people, not even all media, to be completely cognizant of that, honestly.
Yeah, some work to do to re-establish the Ipswich Town legacy of the past, hopefully in a new and exciting way. In terms of that survival chance, a question from Paul, Mark kind of asks about an FFP angle as well, but Nick as well, having rocked up at Bourne Road quite recently, Nick asks, does it now have the look and feel of a Premier League club, or does it still have the L plates on? And kind of Paul asks, how do you balance going for it versus maybe the long-term stability of the club? It's difficult balancing that is, but your sense of where we are now and maybe more work to be done or not?
Yeah, thanks for the questions, guys. I mean, in terms of the trappings and how it looks and feels, if that was one aspect of it, I definitely think, I mean, I've been to a lot of Premier League training grounds, and it's definitely time now that the new one was built at Town. So, and I don't think anyone there would dispute that. So, I don't think we'll see much movement on that until sometime into next year. But definitely the training ground setup they've got now, while adequate, is not one that you'd be rushing to show off to Kalvin Phillips as the reason to join, for example.
I want to mention it in his press conference, like
if he mentions the various prefabs or porta cabins or whatever they are, I'd be surprised. But no, it's perfectly fine up there, but definitely been outstripped, which is why the club has acted to do something about it in a very proactive way that we'll see the benefits of in the next year to 18 months. So I would have thought Portman Road itself, I mean, a lot of you guys are in Ipswich more than me, but I walked past the other day and was, I'm quite impressed by how a lot of the access is a bit cleaner. The signage is going up. It's all starting to dress itself well. And I think the way the club holds itself generally, I think it's trying to put itself in the room among its peers as a club that is here to stay, not just a visitor. I think it's obviously got pretty tight FFP, PSR constraints this season. We know about those. It's a consequence, I mean, firstly of the rules which are going to change, but also of the rapidness of the rise. So you can't go for it too hard anyway. You can only go for it to the degree that you're allowed to go for it, and I think they'd go for it a lot harder if they could. So I don't think there's too much danger of sort of putting the club at risk this season, because they're only going to work within the quite specific constraints they've got. So I think I personally would encourage them to spend as much as they can within that, because they're going to need to, knowing that you've got a pretty solid foundation to rest on in the event that they get relegated, which is a distinct possibility. But I think the way the club is carrying itself in the room and trying to behave, I think from the bits I pick up, is that other club that is going to be comfortable in its skin and means business. But it has got to catch up in several infrastructural areas, definitely. Sure. But it will. I think we've seen that the people who are pulling the strings are very serious people who don't mess about, do things so far in a very sensitive and tactful and inclusive way. Not too many major gripes with how they've done most things. There'll always be a few quibbles here and there for a few people. But yeah, I think it's on the way. I think in terms of how everything looks and feels, maybe it's a season or so early, but it's on the way.
Yeah. Are you going to be in the new media suite on Saturday, or was that an experience you've got to experience later in the season?
Not on Saturday. I will do that later in the season. I will kind of
all the teething bits will have been sorted by the time you come
yeah, quite. I need the buffet to be ready before I even dream of it. Believe
me. There you go. Hope you're listening, Mark Ashton.
I didn't mean that, guys.
No, that's fine. I'll cut it out. I'm not going to cut it out. You mentioned the off-field stuff there as well. Quite a lot of continual change there, and we, as a football club, we kind of used to quite stable ownership. Even Marcus Evans was quite stable, even if he wasn't necessarily making the right choices throughout his 13-odd years. Kind of Mike asks about Mark Ashton's role, being the dual CEO and chairman, but and Alex asks about Bright Path and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's probably quite a chunky topic of conversation and maybe constitutes a podcast in its own right, but probably there's a lot of, as football fans, a lot of commerciality that's now there, and different perspectives on commerciality than have ever been there before. But similarly, the club are bringing in the likes of Matt Holland as a director. So could you, as a very rambly question, trying to cover lots of bases from the likes of Chris Mike, Alex and co, but what's your take of the off-field situation, particularly Matt Holland being involved? That's a very deliberate choice, isn't it?
That's a deliberate choice. I think a very good one. It keeps a direct link with when Town were last. I mean, exactly this situation really. He's obviously a face that I think ever since the owners and Mark Ashton came in, they've looked to ramp up his involvement, and it has steadily increased every season. He's a good face for the club, a good voice for the club, clearly well liked, I think, by people at the training ground and the management, which is important. And I think that's great. I mean, personally, as a guy like 40, it means a lot to me to see that connection is still there. It brings it all back from when you're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, doesn't it? So that pleases me as a supporter, and as somebody trying to take a more distance view, I think it's sensible. Obviously, a lot more new faces and voices on the board now. And there's clearly, a bit of a shift away from the original game changer led composition, both financially and personnel wise. I think we'll see what development that takes in the next 2 or 3 years. We don't know what clout or influence each of these voices will have around the table at this point. We're quite on that. We're having to be led and trust a bit in the people who are now custodians of the club, and hope that the right people are getting around the table with the right motivations and the right voices. And I think until we see anything different, the way they've run the club so far deserves that trust. There's obviously a lot more financial firepower coming in. So we'll see how that pans out. I think Mike O'Leary is clearly a loss. I think he was a big sounding board. I think Mark Ashton, it would say almost a restraining influence on Mark Ashton, sometimes wanting to go at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Wherever he'll be kept, I'm sure he'll be on the end of a phone line. That kind of thing still goes on in football, but it'd be a shame not to have him in a few days a week or whatever he was doing. I don't know really day to day whether that will make too much of a big issue in Ashton's work reporting to America and vice versa. I don't think operationally it will make a huge difference, but I think having someone like O'Leary on the scene in the past 3 years to manage Town's transition into basically a new club with owners who were new to this specific scene was absolutely invaluable. So while he won't be the first person that people remember when the history books are written of this period, I think he's been pretty important.
Blue Monday is proudly brought to you in partnership with our friends at Atwell Solicitors, your ideal legal partner for work on property or business law. Their client care has repeatedly been recognised as outstanding, and they are people-focused with a plain English approach which sets them apart. They have offices in Ipswich, Colchester and London, and to find out more, head to atwells.com.
And Kieran McKenna, we've talked about him and the status he has in the wider game and the national media as well. Chris and Phil asked questions about him. I'm going to see if I can merge them together and make sense of it for you. Chris asks about his ability to get the best, perhaps out of a more limited squad. Came into a League One team and drilled them into a very cultured, strong philosophy type team. And Chris, kind of his question is whether bringing in star players, which is clearly the intent, whether he's got that skill set or whether he actually might favour crafting and moulding younger type players. And Phil's gone there. He's saying, how long would you anticipate McKenna staying at the club? Is it kind of contingent on survival, or might that not even be enough?
Okay, let me address a few of those one by one. I think, firstly, in terms of style in the Premier League, this is going to be a test for him, because Town aren't going to have much of a ball in quite a few of these games. We're going to have it relatively little. We're going to be up against it. The defensive shape is going to have to be spot on. I think this has been covered a bit by people over pre-season, but it seems to me that in these quite high-level friendlies, the ones we haven't cancelled against Bundesliga and Liga 1 teams, it feels to me that there's been quite an emphasis on defensive shape.
Yeah. And
that structure off the ball and getting behind the ball quickly, and maybe conceding one big chance a game, but generally keeping it fairly tight. I think that's the way it's largely going to have to be. I think there'll have to be times when there's a bit of a compromise made on what the setup was last season, whether it's putting an extra midfielder in, whether it's being more wing-backy than winger-ish, out wide. And I think that's going to be a challenge for McKenna. We're going to have to be a lot more pragmatic. I think at times, though, in the Championship last season, we did see that. Town were never defensive, but they picked their moments. They really picked their moments to have bursts in games where they sort of had 2 or 3 good chances or big attacks in a row and tried to influence it that way, and the rest of the time we're a bit more cautious. So I think that adaptation, it will continue. I trust McKenna to be quite flexible on that front, and I think people are going to have to understand as well that it can't all be all-out attack bombing forward, or frankly there's going to be quite a few in the goals against column, which I think there will be anyway, but we don't want it getting out of hand. In terms of managing a squad, yeah, you could say that bringing in someone like Phillips, it's a bit of a disjoint with the other level of signing that we've tended to make or amass in the past goodness knows how many years. But I mean, firstly, on the Phillips note, everyone who I know who's worked with him says he's a lovely boy, so I'm sure that'll be fine. But also, I think McKenna is just confident. He's worked with these big stars, hasn't he, at Man United especially. He knows how to handle them, I think, interpersonally and in terms of emotional intelligence. He's got it more than most managers have. I'm not too worried about that. I think if he saw somebody who was going to be a kidder or who didn't want to do it or didn't want to come, and I'm sure there've been those guys before him with pull the plug, he would not be inviting Kalvin Phillips to become an Ipswich Town player. So I'm not too worried about the balance. I don't think we're going to have a situation akin to that we maybe saw in 2001, 2002, when maybe the club tried to run a bit before it could walk and didn't quite think about a blend of personalities. I think we've got a very good dressing room now that can almost run itself, and I think anyone who comes in will be quickly made to feel part of that. And I think the third part was that about McKenna's longevity.
Yeah.
I mean, how long is a piece of string? Look, if I mean, we all want him to do really well. I think another good season at Town, and a good season is finishing 17th on goal difference, isn't it? Let's be honest. But I think if he does that, you're not going to keep him forever. This is not professionally based on anything. It's just something I've been saying personally for a long time, is that if Town stay up, it wouldn't surprise me if the Spurs job was going in a year's time. And I think if that happened, my personal view would be, thank you so much, go for it. I don't think we can look too many years ahead. I think it was a pretty close call this summer, honestly, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I think we all know that, and I think later he's pretty much said it. Let's be quite honest, that was a close call. So let's take it year by year. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
And enjoy it, to your point before as well, Nick. I can totally understand where Phil's coming from with the question as well. So.
Completely. It's a really good question.
Bridge when we come to it. A couple more questions. One from Telegram and one from me to finish. Jack Saunders, Jack, having worked in a little bit of a different topic here, having worked in club comms before as well as national media, how do you think clubs and national journalists regard fan broadcasters, e.g. Blue Monday. Do you think that relationship will change in the future?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it almost depends on hi Jack, by the way. It almost depends on which fan media it is, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, don't be too critical.
So I think, okay, so when I started out, and for the many who probably won't know, my first job in this sort of career was working at Arsenal Football Club on the more sort of club media side of things. I now obviously am working for The Guardian. It's very, very different. But I would say back then, maybe not so much the viewing the club, but definitely around the journalists who worked around the club as well, was independent media. Can't go near them. It was very, very standoffish. I think that started to change a bit around the sort of early to middle of the last decade. I think quite a lot of clubs, and Arsenal were one of them. They used to have days in pre-season where they bring sites like Arseblog, Gunnerblog, as was, although he now James McNicholas writes brilliantly for The Athletic. They'd open the doors and give the bloggers a few interviews, give them a bit of access and insight, and understand that it's better that everyone is on side than not. Yeah, it's the old Mick McCarthy. It's better to be inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in, if I'm allowed to say that.
Of course.
On Blue Monday. But yeah, rambling a bit. Look, there are good and erudite and very well-meaning and constructive and sensible independent media, and I'm not just blowing smoke to say Blue Monday is one of them, but it is. And then definitely I think around some of the bigger clubs where there are so many voices and so many people seeing the opportunity to do something, say something, which they should be allowed to, everyone's very important, then I think you get some of those that clubs are not so keen to work with and feel a bit more suspicious of. And there may be times, without going into too much detail, where clubs have trusted an independent media with something and then they've been let down. So It more depends knowing who you can trust. But I think the landscape has changed. Like I go into press boxes now in the Premier League and see journalists working for independent media who they just fit in with the rest of us. It's cool. It's a fantastic job they do, and the good ones are really, really good. And it's just a matter, I think, for clubs to understand that just because there's some bad ones, it doesn't mean you shouldn't work with the good ones, which I think is maybe been an issue sometimes. But I think, I think the town ecosystem, by the way, very, very fortunate to have Blue Monday. Obviously, have those were days as well. It's in very, very good shape, and I hope that the relationships that are built around the club and the town through that continue to strengthen in the Premier League seasons, because it's really, really important.
And kind of finishing off talking about football fan, you are a town fan. You've seen the good years, the bad years, or like me, the two Spurs in the Premier League prior to this season. Come Saturday, just before 12:30, Nick, how's the heart rate going to be? How do you think the emotions will be going into that game against Liverpool?
It's interesting. I don't know yet. Like for the whole summer, I've been thinking, my goodness, we had that day in May, and that was just the end product of so much. I don't think I'll see this again, and it was just perfect, wasn't it? Like the whole weekend. And part of me is like, okay, that's happened. That's been put to bed after 2 decades plus. I'm cool. But I think on Saturday, tomorrow, 12:29, you're thinking, God, I hope we don't get turned over, or
gets real.
The usual pre-match sensation with an extra frisson of, wow, we're here. We didn't think we were going to be here, not for a long time, maybe never again, and we are. And so I'm sure everyone, while having these moments of high excitement, will have these moments of reflection too, because I remember. I mean, we can all go over umpteen terrible moments from the last 2 decades, but I mean, just one is like in the COVID lockdown, watching us beating Burton at home with a goal off Emma Hughes's backside and sitting in one of the few available seats in Block G or something like that, and taking the train up from London, especially because it felt like such a special occasion to be able to watch this really poor town side scraping out a win in mid-table in front of a couple of thousand people. So, you look at nights like that, and then you compare what we're going to be walking into tomorrow, and it's really special. So yeah, I think the Goosebumps will be firmly on edge tomorrow, and I just hope everyone enjoys it. I mean, no one needs a pep talk from me, but there's gonna there's
go on, Nick.
look, we're going to lose 3 in a row, 4 in a row, here or there, multiple
That's
times.
not the pep talk I don't mind. Not that one. The other one. We're going to finish 5th. No, I'm joking.
We're going for a 3rd straight promotion to the Champions League. But there'll be a lot of moments where people might start thinking, "Oh, here we go." But trust these guys; it's going to be fun. And even if there are times when it looks like things are getting away from us, they'll find a way to make it competitive and to make it interesting. So I think if we all stick with it, I think we're in for another absolutely fantastic ride. I really do.
Yeah, brilliant stuff, Nick. Where can we find you on socials? And if we search for your name and your profile for the Guardian website comes up, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can do that and find, including hopefully the Morsy one that's gone up. Nick Ames 82 on it, so I should really do a blue sky like a lot of people have done now, to be honest. So that's one for maybe after my holidays, I'll get that done. An occasional visitor to the Blue Monday Telegram group as well, if you want to. Very occasionally. I don't want to put Nick on the spot there, but Nick is occasionally over there, so can gain his views every now and then as well. Nick, thank you so much. I remember the first one of these we did was after your article about the malaise the club was in around that kind of time that you were talking about. So to quote the great Paul Rudd, look at us. Who'd have thought it? Thank you so much for your time and answering everyone's questions. Enjoy the season, and no doubt we'll catch up at some point during the season as well. It's a pleasure, Rich. Thank you, and thanks to all the guys watching and listening. Really appreciate it.